Welcome to the Connacht Competition Engines Irish Hillclimb and Sprint Championship report. This first weekend of the 2012 season was hosted by the Wexford Motor Club. Immediately, Sylvie Mullins set the pace on the first run, with McKinley just over a tenth of a second behind. O'Connell, followed by Courtney, were next, both within 2 seconds of the leader. Mullins was over half a second faster again on the second run in the V8 Gold. Joe Courtney pulled back over 8 tenths, but O'Connell, suffering from electrical problems, dropped out of the running for the day. McKinley responded to Mullins' pace on run 3, with the time just 2/100ths off the Clareman's run 2. But there was more in the Gould, and by the end of the day he'd steadily improved to a winning margin of 0.92 of a second, and the first 10 points in the championship. With 9 points from Saturday, McKinley pushed even closer to Mullins on Sunday. He had the lead after run 2, but once again Sylvie seemed to be able to turn up the pace as the day went on. Fastest on run 3, he won this second round by 0.35 of a second. After Sylvie Mullins' tremendous start to the championship a fortnight earlier in Wexford, where he won the opening rounds of the series, reigning champion Simon McKinley could expect Mullins on his home ground to continue to turn the screws on him. McKinley showed his hand early on run 1, with what would be his fastest time of the day, a 48.39. Sylvie put down a 49.92 on run 1, but this would prove to be his only competitive run on the day, as his gearbox broke on run 2. A marathon effort to repair it saw him back out on run 5, but he hit further problems. McKinley clocked in a further 3 times within 3 tenths of his first run, once again showing his remarkable consistency. He then treated the spectators to a sideways victory lap on run 5. Ray Cunningham chose to start his class championship campaign here on his home event. 2 wins in Class 1 sponsored by the Daly family and a dazzling 8th overall on Ballyalbin should put him in contention as the points add up during the year. Drivers will count their best 8 scores from this year's 12 rounds for their final score. Elaine O'Reilly was second of the mini triplet at the head of this class on corkscrew, while Trish Daly, who was lucky to get away with this on run 1, was third. It was the other way round on Sunday, however, with Trish second and Elaine third. This was enough for O'Reilly to extend her championship lead by a point from Daly, who leapt from 5th to 2nd position after the weekend. Brendan Dawson in his Honda Civic held off Neil Bradbury in the Cinquecento on round 3, but Neil turned the tables on him on round 4 to maintain his strong third position in the class with the 1100cc Fiat. A massive effort was put into the McKinley Cinquecento to get it running on Saturday morning after it went on fire the night before the event. Neil Bradbury and several others helped Aidan Courtney and Senan O'Connor to graft a wiring loom into the car. They got it to run for Senan on Saturday, but with the ECU in safe mode he was restricted to 4,500 RPM. Aidan decided not to run on Sunday after a late night effort failed to persuade the car to run faster. Ben O'Brien was 7th in a borrowed Skoda Felicia on Saturday and successfully completed his mission to upgrade his licence when he finished 6th on Sunday. More power beckons for him. Declan Cundlin was on his own in Class 2 sponsored by the Galway Motor Club, but had a mighty battle for rear-wheel drive saloon supremacy with Dennis Hogan of 3B in the BMW M3. Dennis was fastest by just over 2 tenths on run 1. Declan then brought the time down by over a second on run 2, but then Hogan bettered that by 3 tenths on run 3 and a half a second on run 5 to win the tussle. Dennis was third in Class 3B, sponsored by the Donegal Motor Club, behind brother-in-law Éanna Carroll on Saturday. Éanna looking more in control with the new steering geometry and 17-inch wheels on the car. Éanna busted driveshaft on Sunday, producing CV rings from his Civic, which must have given him the idea to get engaged when he got home. Congratulations to him and Steffi. He double drove Dennis's car on Sunday and finished third behind Hogan, who proved his affinity with his own car. Rory Stevens was delighted to win the class both days after having trouble on the second day back in Wexford. He was also 6th and 5th overall in the Burn. Ian Quinn continues to make Class 3A, sponsored by Quinn Motorsport, his own. He scored very highly overall at the weekend, 14th on the first day and 12th on the second in the Mini Busa. John Whitley joined him this weekend for 2 second places in the class and was very lucky to get away with this at the top of Ballyalbin. Frank Nuttall made a welcome return to the championship in his 1955 Graham in Class 4, sponsored by the Motor Enthusiast Club. He was the winner of the class, calculated by handicap, on Saturday. Second that day was Sean Murray in the Lotus Elan. Third was Mick O'Shea in the MGB GT. He was also fastest on scratch times both days. Fourth was Barry Smith in the Mark 1 Escort. The handicap went his way on Sunday, so he took maximum points then. Mick was second with Frank third this time, followed by Sean fourth. Great to see such historic cars on such an historic hill climb. In the Wexford Motor Club sponsored Class 5, Enda Kennedy was fastest up Corkscrew, chased by Gerard O'Connor sharing the same car. Enda was the sole registered driver in the class on Sunday, and Julie took maximum points again. In Class 8, sponsored by the Carlo Motor Club, Patrick Haughey in the Mark II Escort and Georgie Bell in the Honda Civic returned and continued where they left off last season, with points for first and second apiece, both days. Joe Courtney was the sensation of Class 6, sponsored by Carnew Tyre Centre on Saturday. Not only did he win the class, but he was second overall from Paul O'Connell in Class 7, who rapidly put the squeeze on Courtney when he finally got his car going on run 3. It went down to the final 5th run for these two, and stayed in Courtney's favour by 0.07 of a second. Courtney decided to preserve his OMS on Sunday and drove the Cento instead. O'Connell was second, behind McKinley on Corkscrew in Class 7 sponsored by Crocora Mills. John Byrne was second on the Saturday in Class 6 and won the class on Sunday, with his overall points now adding up to 4th in the championship. John Mahon was third and second in the class, moving him into second in that class battle. Deirdre Delaney was 4th and 3rd, and that moved her up to 3rd in the class points, with Courtney not scoring on Sunday. Brendan Harper continued his run of 5th places in Class 7, keeping him in that position in the class as well. Dermot Nolan was 4th in the class both days, but brought his own opposition with him in the form of championship sponsor Phil Price. Dr. Phil was just over a second behind Nolan on Corkscrew in 9th overall, behind Dermot's 7th place, with John Mahon between them. They were remarkably close together on Sunday, despite problems. 17th and 18th overall, with Dermot breaking 2nd gear and Phil breaking 4th. Mullins was 3rd in Class 7 on Saturday, and top 3 positions for this class were the same as the top 3 overall on Sunday. Paul O'Connell was 3rd, still with some electrical gremlins. On run 2 he pulled over at the car park halfway, for fear he'd hold up Mullins. Sylvie was fastest on run 1 by 0.08 from Simon, but got progressively slower over the remaining 2 runs. Simon McKinley did the job on run 2, by a margin of 1.59 seconds. If County Clare had been Sylvie Mullins' home ground, this certainly was Simon McKinley's home event. Any drivers that might have missed the final corner could literally have ended up in Simon and Deirdre's doorstep, as indeed some drivers nearly did. Unsurprisingly, McKinley was fastest out of the traps with a 38.31. It only took Sylvie until run 3 to beat this time, but unfortunately for him, Simon is a moving target, and he was by then setting times over a second faster still, his best being on run 2. Mullins had a huge tank slapper on the final run, which lifted the rear of the car over a foot off the ground, and he backed off for the rest of the run, convinced he'd done damage. Paul O'Connell finally appears to have solved his electrical problems, but a failed 3rd gear prevented him from mounting a serious challenge to the top 2. Joe Courtney continued his stellar overall performances in the Hornet, 4th both days and winner of Class 6. John Byrne in the Jedi was just behind him in both the class and overall on Saturday, but a hard charge on Sunday ended up beside a tree, but fortunately John was unharmed. Neil Anderson pushed Rory Stevens all weekend with his Ward WD9V for Class 3B honours, but Rory came out on top both days in his Turbo Radical. Their battle took them as high as 5th and 6th on Sunday, the pressure showing for Rory on the final run. Deirdre Delaney debuted her new car at the Knoll. Racing towards her home each day must have helped to overcome any lack of familiarity with the freshly prepared Opel Lotus and the switch to the big Class 7. Dermot Nolan was 5th in the class each day in the Connacht MP873. Once again, Dermot was generous enough to share his car, this time with former championship competitor Russell Stanworth, who survived this moment on Saturday and gave Dermot quite a run for his money on Sunday. Brendan Keane made a welcome return to the championship in the Swallow DR14 with a brace of 4th places in the class and 6th and 7th overall. Paul O'Connell was 3rd again on Sunday, persevering with those gearbox problems. Sylvie started Sunday on much the same pace as Saturday, but then had trouble with a sticking throttle cable. It was run 4 before he got out again. He went faster, but was still just over a second behind McKinley. McKinley's winning time and fastest of the weekend by 400th came on the first run on Sunday, as he too had gearbox problems and had to park up the land. He then took over his Fiat for the afternoon to set a benchmark for the Cento drivers of 54.92. The Connacht Competition Engine's Irish Hillclimb and Sprint Championship touched down at Kilrush Airfield near Athy for the first day of the Carlo Car Club Sprint, held over the June bank holiday weekend. The second day's event was held along the riverbank at Bagnalstown on Sunday. Despite a flight of championship competitors to the Sangueno Hillclimb in France on the same weekend, there was a strong entry for the Irish event, backed by local drivers. With Simon McKinley on the away list, the leaderboard was in for a shake-up. Arriving at the event, second in the championship, Sylvie Mullins hit the tarmac and set the opening pace on run 1. His onboard footage shows us an exercise in pure restraint. This is what happens with just the slightest loosening of the reins. Paul O'Connell nearly took off on the first run and was delighted to be right there with Sylvie, just under 2/10 behind him. John Byrne got involved in an attack of the cones on run 1 in his Jedi, so didn't get a time for that run. It was Sylvie and Paul's turn to have trouble on run 2, while John recorded a steady enough time, good enough for third at this point. It was chocks away on the third and final timed run, even though there were a few spots of rain to be felt. O'Connell planed 1100ths off his best time, but Byrne got a lock on him, and Paul was goosed by well over a second. His in-car shows us from the cockpit just what a handful these powerful and light cars are. Sylvie found a full 2 3/4 on the final run to land the win. Ian Quinn in Class 3A was the first to actually take off, but minis don't fly well, even if you do put the engine in the back. They're tough though, and Ian continued with maximum class points for the weekend. John Mahon scored 2 second places behind John Byrne, and they now share the lead in their Class 6. Brendan Keane scored well on Saturday in his Swallow, 3rd in Class 7 and 5th in the overall points. Brendan Harper endured this spin to take 4th at the Thigh and drove straight to 3rd in the class points at Bagnalstown in his Delta T81. At the head of the field, Sylvie Mullins was fastest after run 1 by over 2 seconds from Paul O'Connell, with John Byrne 3rd. Sylvie's pace slackened a bit while Paul O'Connell closed in by over a second on run 2. Byrne closed by even more and climbed to 2nd place. Mullins squeezed a further second out of his best time, as did O'Connell on the 3rd and final run, but no one expected what would happen next. John Byrne, who'd spent every spare minute of the day and night in the weeks leading up to this event, repairing his car after an accident in Knoll, went more than 3 seconds faster than his previous best, charging through the deluge over a second quicker than Mullins to win the event outright. An incredible turnaround in just 3 weeks. Sylvie Mullins arrived in Kirkstone, having taken the lead in the championship, while Simon McKinley was away competing in France. His lead looked big, but because drivers can only count their best 8 out of 12 counting rounds, the true picture was more like a 1-point lead to McKinley. The fastest racetrack in Ireland, being the perfect place to stretch the legs of the Judd engine Gould, Mullins made good use of his car and struck a pace McKinley had no answer for. By the finish on Saturday, he was over 3 seconds faster, and now they had 4 wins apiece from the season, and were effectively even on points. With a 2-month break before Donegal, Sunday was Mullins' big chance to hold the lead in the build-up to that final weekend. The organisers were hard pushed to get 2 runs for the Motorsport Ireland competitors with such an entry, so there was no time for settling in. He was flat out from run 1. Sylvie's heart must have been in his mouth when this happened. McKinley punched in at a 1:18.04, a little off his practice pace, but at least he had a time on the board. It was all down to 1 run for Sylvie. He used every inch of the road, and despite a little sideways at the bottom hairpin, he clocked a very impressive 1:13.30. McKinley's response of a 1:15.57 was impressive in the lesser powered land, but not enough. Mullins leads the championship by 1 point as Knockalla looms in September. Sylvie Mullins was on a mission in Donegal. All he needed was one win from the final 2 rounds of the Connacht Competition Engines Irish Hillclimb and Sprint Championship to make that title his own and break the domination of Simon McKinley. Simon went first and laid down a 38.2 second run, a little outside the record he set in 2010. Sylvie got down to work straight away, setting a new record of 37.55. The rain came down on run 2 and settled in for the day. It was job done for Sylvie. He'd won the event and the championship for the first time. He rested at the Gould for the afternoon and watched the clouds anxiously in disbelief that it was all over. Simon continued in vain in the rain for the rest of the day, putting on a fabulous display of car control in treacherous conditions, but his wet times were over 5 seconds off the dry weather pace. Seamus Morris, not contesting the championship this year but a welcome visitor, was 3rd overall and quickest on the wettest run 3. He had quite a scare on the way into Will Hare's corner here. Joe Courtney and John Byrne were another pair with a score to settle in the north. Their battle for 4th place became a battle for 3rd in the absence of Paul O'Connell. Joe was fastest both days, so it was he that leapfrogged Paul in the overall championship to take the final podium position, with John Byrne 5th for the year. Rory Stevens was 6th overall and beat Dermot Nolan, debuting a Peugeot-engined Reynard. I think this means Dermot owes Rory €38, after a complicated sequence of small bets, including several double or quits. Dermot must have been totting this up in his head as he entered the first hairpin on Saturday. In reporting on the class championships, results stated are those of registered drivers in relation to each other, and not necessarily their overall class positions. No matter what way you look at it, however, Ray Cunningham was the fastest in Class 1 on each day. Second place each day was all Elaine O'Reilly needed to win the class championship. She'll have 101 on her door next year. Third each day was enough for Trish Daly to take second in her Mini and improve her seeding from 103 to 102 for next year. There were no wuss bankers in the Cinquecentos, and no in-betweeners either. Not even Brendan Dawson's Civic could split the Three Amigos on Sunday. Aidan Courtney was the fastest both days by over a second. Neil Bradbury was second fastest each day, which was enough to jump into 4th in the class championship for the year, ahead of Aidan and Senan O'Connor, who had to work very hard just to reach Aidan's opening pace by the end of the weekend. On one run, Neil and Senan, who were double driving the McKinley Cento, were separated by just 0.04 of a second. 7th in the points each day was enough for Brendan Dawson in his Civic to take 3rd in the class championship, a very successful return to the sport. Declan Cundilan was pretty much on his own in Class 2 this year, which is a shame for such a competitive driver who was 11th overall on Saturday. He wins the class championship, but surely there are more up to 1650cc saloon cars in the country that could come out to play. Another class which suffered from low entries was 3A. Ian Quinn made a clean sweep of the points. How much fun does that car look like to drive? 14th overall each day. John Whitley was second in the class points in the event and for the year, whittling his times down from a dry 57.38 on Saturday to a 54.59 on Sunday. Rory Stevens was the sole Class 3B representative in Donegal, who claimed first in that class championship ahead of Neil Anderson, who didn't need to travel to claim second. In the historics, Bernard Foley was the fastest on scratch each day and handicap on Saturday. Second on handicap on Sunday was enough for him to win the class championship on that scoring system. A pair of third places earned Mick O'Shea second in the championship in the MGB GT. Frank Nuttall's consistency brought him third in the well-supported class, driving his Graham. Fourth in the class this year was Sean Murray in his rare Lotus Elan 2+2. Fifth was Barry Smith in his Mark 1 Escort, after scoring points for second and first in Donegal. It was Jerry Freeman's turn to come out on top ahead of Dermot Quigley this year, after some very determined driving in the Anglia. Dermot scored the most points on Saturday, but Jerry scored more on Sunday. Vincent O'Reilly came 5th and 6th in the points in Donegal and 8th in the championship, struggling with a limited supply of gears, and did very well to hold this. Ed Cassidy continues to show us how it used to be done in the Iona Special and was 10th in the historic championship. Eugene French just needed a run on Saturday to make sure of a Class 5 championship win. Gerard O'Connor was second on Saturday and won on Sunday. His in-car shows us just how tricky it was in the rain. Enda Kennedy had third place sewn up prior to Donegal, so Scott Milligan scored a third and a second place to consolidate his fourth place this season. Joe Courtney got third overall, so John Byrne gets the first place award for Class 6, with John Mahon getting second, after scoring 8 points each day and 7th and 8th overall. In the Class 7 Championship, Mullins and McKinley will receive overall awards, so Paul O'Connell gets the first place prize. Dermot Nolan second, and Deirdre Delaney, who only moved up to Class 7 mid-season, will receive third after finishing 12th and 9th place overall in Donegal. Georgie Bell didn't get full opposition from Patrick Haughey in Class 8 this year due to Patrick's work commitments, but he will be delighted to have beaten the Donegal man and last year's class winner on his home turf on Sunday, on the way to winning the class for the year. It was a better day for the club on day 2, with the timing gear working for an early start and a fully dry day. With the championship decided, the record was the target of the day, and both McKinley and Mullins went at it all guns blazing. Mullins set 4 times faster than the 2010 record, and Simon 3. McKinley got just below Sylvie's Saturday record, but by now Mullins had moved on, improving it by almost a full second on the pace of 2 years ago, to 36.78 seconds. Sylvie's rise to prominence has been frustrating over the years, frequently showing early pace on his home rounds, but not being able to contest the whole season. Now, after a full campaign in his fantastic car, he's pushed the pace of what must be Ireland's fastest motorsport. Hopefully he'll be back to defend the title next year.